From a couple of industry legends comes for consoles Beyond a Steel Sky, a story-driven sci-fi adventure game set in a dystopian utopia reminiscent of the nightmare social credit system from Black Mirror, or, China. Beyond is the surprise sequel to Beneath a Steel Sky, an old-school point-and-click released in '94 that has since gained cult status. But is this a cult worth joining? If you ask PC gamers, whom have had access to Beyond since last summer, the answer is a resounding, So let's put this title under the microscope to decide for ourselves. In my opinion, Beyond a Steel Sky is indeed a polarizing experience, at times dazzling you with superb voice acting or colorful art design, and at other times shooting itself in the steel-toed boots with forced jokes and bizarre pacing. Nowhere is this inconsistency on clearer display than in Beyond's story, a metric I break into plot, characters, and dialogue. Now, I tend to struggle with upbeat, off-color sci-fi video game humor.
Yeah, 'cause you eat butts.
And I know that's a first world or first solar system problem, but there's just something about sarcasm-soaked sci-fi that rubs me in all the wrong ways. This in mind, you may be surprised to see an impressed 4 in Beyond's dialogue micrometric, as the game is admittedly drenched in lukewarm one-liners. But the deliveries here are just so good that I couldn't stand to give it anything else. Who knows, maybe I'm just a sucker for those Aussie accents, but wow, do they really help this game stand out from similar titles and bring each character in Beyond to life.
Your truck needs a new power cell.
Like a cheese sandwich needs chutney.
It's such a shame then that Beyond gives some of the game's most memorable characters so little time on screen, a pacing problem that sinks this game's plot score. Without spoiling anything, returning protagonist Robert Foster is enjoying a simple existence in the Gap, essentially the Australian outback, when random androids attack and kidnap Milo, a child Foster cares about, or so we're told in some cinematic comic panels reminiscent of the first game's intro. And I'll just note here that you probably don't need to play Beneath to understand the world of Beyond, though there are a number of light throwbacks throughout. Foster then tracks the androids to Union City, the site of the first game's events, and with the help of long-lost bestie Joey, simultaneously unravels the mystery of Milo's disappearance and the dystopian oddity that is Union City. So the premise has potential, but the pacing here is so unhurried and the tone so lighthearted as to squash any real tension. For example, just as Foster finally begins closing in on Milo's kidnappers, the game takes a 5-minute break to regale you with some droid poetry. Likewise, Union City presents you with no clear antagonist until late game, so your early efforts to rage against the steel machine feel fairly low stakes. If these sound like small gripes to you, then good. These videos in my scoring system merely exist to help you prioritize what matters to you. On to content, the most relevant micrometric here being world. While beautiful and bustling, there's a surprising lack of variety to Union City's handful of environments. The museum looks a lot like the gala, which looks a lot like your apartment, and you'll spend a good deal of time backtracking between them via monorail. Minos, however, a digital realm you access via technology from the first game, provides a nice change of pace. It's in here that you manipulate via fairly interesting puzzles Union City's social credit system, or Kudos, which has created a de facto city caste system of sorts. Kudos tees up what could have been a potentially immersive game mechanic, having to gain Kudos to unlock new Union City locations that would have brought you closer to Milo, right? Alas, Beyond never really integrates you into this Kudos system, and you, consequently, remain rather detached from the world and its inhabitants. This mechanical miss brings me to gameplay, and as you might expect from a game that actually first launched on the App Store, Beyond is mechanically light, devoid of any combat unless you include throwing sausages at gang birds. As non-combat goes, Foster makes frequent use of his DEET, or data transfer tool, which allows him to manipulate Union City electronics to interesting and often amusing ends. But that's about it. As for playability, Beyond apparently launched with horrific optimization, but has since reached a relatively stable state. That said, NPCs will still bump into you during conversation, a problem that has amazingly persisted 27 odd years since the prequel.
Excuse me.
And the camera will occasionally select some odd viewing angles mid-dialogue. But in my opinion, Beyond's charming art style makes up for many of its faults. There's a lovely hand-painted aesthetic etched onto the faces of Union City's empathetic inhabitants, though some shoddy animations can render hilarious some otherwise heartfelt moments. I rarely notice the game's subtle score or sound design, so we'll leave them with 3s and get on with it.
Yes, get on with it!
After averaging up our micrometrics, Beyond a Steel Sky earns the following metric scores and a final mega score of 3.14 out of 5. It's a decent score for what is, I suppose, a decent little game, and it shouldn't deter you from giving Beyond a try if you're interested in a lighthearted story-driven adventure game. Until next time, this is Scope, and thanks for watching.